So I hope that there was a new word or phrase that kind of spoke to you today. Maybe it was just from a different translation. Maybe, again, it's been the same situation, I guess. Maybe you're still looking at yourselves as if, oh yeah, if I was a disciple, here's what I would be thinking. But, well, what if I was one of the crowd? What if you were one of the kids? Has anybody taken that point of view yet? What if you were one of the kids at that time? And you're sitting there, and you're not quite sure, maybe you understand everything that's happening with Jesus, but all you can understand are what he's saying. But you can understand, I am super hungry. I am super hungry. I have not eaten, right? And so right there, again, is another way of looking at it as Jesus feeding people, Jesus taking care of each other. And again, as a child wouldn't necessarily know, oh, there's no food here around here, you know. They would just go, I'm hungry. And Jesus feeds them. Well, I had a really terrific week. I've been gone to several different conferences, UCC and American Baptist, and then there's some that were online. But this past week, I was actually in Delaware, Ohio. 2 years ago, they held it in Nashville, and so I was very happy that I didn't have to travel far at all, and I was able to actually just stay with Katie. But I was there and from like 9 to 9 for several days this past week, and it was really a wonderful experience of hearing the word preached, it kind of in maybe in a different or I don't want to say new way, but I suppose. Also hearing some new songs that I had been unaware of. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to start sharing those. Everything was done for today, but I'm hoping that you will find meaning in those too. So anyway, I'm hoping to share some of the different lessons or different things that were struck me. But one of the things that was talked about several different times was this idea, obviously, of justice. How, as we as Christians, how can we say that we're Christians, or how can we be worshiping together and not include some discussion, some reminder of different things, compassion. Made me think of, remember when we did, it was a year ago, we did that series where we had the words compassion, love, justice, respect, and we had them all just sitting around. How can we not have worship if we're truly worshiping Jesus without thinking about all those different things? So there was a lot of talk of justice issues, and a lot of talk of just that the recognition maybe that many of us were just like, just wiped out, and just feeling hopeless, and just feeling like, oh Lord, where, how do you want us to proceed? How can we do this? How can we bring our world together? And so they talked quite a bit about the Psalms. And we sometimes will use a psalm along with usually gospel. But I was reminded again, just the depth of the Psalms. We read a lot of Psalms in Lent, right? Because we have those Psalms that there's always, oh Lord, how long are you going to let this go on? How long, Lord, do we have to live this way? How long do other people that are being the injustices in the world, how long? But then again, the Psalms almost always, there are some exceptions, circle back though, right? And say, but God, you have provided for your people over and over and over again. And we know that good will prevail somehow. And we know, God, that your love and us spreading that love is the most important thing. So it was wonderful to me to reminder about that. And it just made me really think several times when we would have silences, I just really thought about it. And I thought, boy, do I give enough time for all of us to kind of sit with that? Or am I always just like, well, things are bad now, but it's okay, everybody. We'll be all right. Because that's kind of my tendency as a person, even as a counselor, is to sometimes not allow people to just sit with their feelings and sit with that sadness or that despair. Because that's part of life, and we need permission to be able to do that, to experience that. And sometimes we want to say, how long? I found this is I've been, every once in a while, I'll share some of the UCC devotionals because I get those every day. And there isn't an American Baptist equivalent, unfortunately. But there are some really great ones that I get every couple months when they do send them, and I share those. But some of these come every day, so maybe some of you have read this one. But this one's called Wait. How long? It's by John Edgerton, and I always enjoy his every time I get them. So you can sign up for these on your own if you like them. And I don't know what day this was, but several weeks ago. Anyway, so he just starts out really quickly with Genesis 7:11 through 12. In the 600th year of Noah's life, I thought of this, Nancy, when you and I were talking before church. On the 17th day of the second month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. The rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And so John Edgerton writes, he says, 40 days is a good, solid biblical number. It signifies completeness, totality. It is time fulfilled. For it to rain for 40 days means it well and truly rained for as long as one could imagine. And again, there are different translations or different views. For some people, they have a literal translation that it literally was 40 days, not 41, but 40 of our days. And again, does that change anything? It really doesn't. As long as people who are here thinking it was actually 40, and maybe they are correct, but that they're looking at that as that number also has significance, right? It is the completeness of something, 40 days. But here's the part of the story that I forgot from Sunday school. Exactly how long Noah and his family had to stay in the ark. Hint, it's a lot longer than 40 days. And again, whether that's a literal 40 days or whether it's just the completeness of time, it wasn't complete. The waters swelled on the earth for 150 days, Genesis 7:24. Yep, 150 days. That's how long Noah and his family were sequestered in the ark, forced by calamity to withdraw from the world with no human company but one another. If 40 days signifies completeness of time, then 150 days signifies way too stinking long of time. No longer symbolic, no longer cute, no longer novel, just way too long. As those first 40 days and nights came to a close and the rain stopped, Noah and his family must have felt thrilled. With the worst of the danger past, they must have been itching to end their confinement. They must have been eager to declare that the world's turmoil was finished. But that's not what happened. It dragged on and on and on. The story of humanity's deliverance is a story of counting days and losing track of days. It is a story of thinking the worst is over, only to find it's just begun. It is a story I am holding on today, John says, because it means I am not the first child of God to feel the way that I am feeling. And then he concludes his devotional with the prayer, God of the endless march of days, be with me in these hard times. Well, that's something that we all can pray with, right? Be with us in these hard times. Whether it is certain things going on in the world, maybe it is certain things in our own families, in our own lives, in our own bodies. God be with us these days. Well, I wanted to share a story that was shared by Reverend Kathy McShane, and she is one of the Changemaker Initiative leaders. And I was able to see some of the Zoom meeting. It kind of was held at some of the same times when I was at this conference. But there's some really interesting things. So I'm hoping that council is going to talk a little bit about it on Tuesday. I had asked them, or if some of them would be willing to watch some of this information about this initiative. And it involves training for the congregation, and then it involves equipping people in the congregation, but also in your community to be change makers, however that looks like in every single specific church, obviously has a different situation. So I'm hoping that that's something maybe we're going to continue to kind of be looking at, to see, discern if that is something that we would like to do. So again, church council will be making that decision, but I hope if any of you, and I did send this link out a couple weeks ago, if any of you had a chance to look at any of those to give your opinions or your thoughts, please make sure you share that with Mark or myself or anybody really on council. But I wanted to share this. It's just an example of how churches can make a difference. Now, I hope that you have seen this in other ways, although it's difficult with the news, right? For a while, I wasn't watching news. Well, you guys, some of you know me that have been around a long time, that for a long time, I just didn't watch the news. It just was too hard. And then I had several years of, no, I need to see what's happening in the world, because otherwise I'm blinded, because I don't see it in my own life. And then, this last amount of time, it's been a little bit more of like, I don't think I could watch anything right now. I don't think my spirit can take it. But then at the same time, then it's been, no, I need to. So now I've been trying to watch different kinds of news on purpose, watching different news stations, so I can try to get the most complete picture, potentially, hopefully, maybe of what is happening in the world. But I also want to see specifics. And that was one of the things that was shared a lot at this conference also, were just specific examples. It's really, it's you can kind of forget about a certain group of people, fill in the blank, whoever that would be, that maybe is more marginalized or is kind of forgotten about or is suffering injustices. You can kind of forget about them until you meet somebody. And this was there were, I think, maybe 200, maybe more, 300 people at this conference. And there was a talk back after every single section. We had meals together, and I always made sure I sat with somebody different in a table, so I would meet 8 new people from all around the country, well, the world, really. People came from all over. But to actually be able to hear some stories of people that were not like, well, Northwest Ohio. And not that Northwest Ohio doesn't have its own issues, because it certainly does. But it was just really interesting to get pulled out of my normal group of people that I see, and I missed you all, or friends that I have, or coworkers, other ministers right here, and to be pulled out of that. And I think sometimes that's such a good thing for all of us, to be pulled out of our own little pool, our little pack, if you will. And to be able to see things from a different perspective, to be able to hear stories that are actual, this happened to me, or this happened in my community. So I want to share this one story today. It's by Reverend Kathy McShane. She says, a couple of years ago, I went to Cuba as part of a small delegation from the California-Nevada Conference of the Church. They were about 8 of us. I think they're United Methodist. I think she's ordained United Methodist. There were about 8 of us. The bishop, well, yeah, probably, or it could be Lutheran. Let's see. A few other pastors and district superintendents and me. The bishop wanted us to see the Methodist Church of Cuba. I thought it was, but I had read this last week, and I couldn't remember. Okay, which had gone through a sort of phenomenal growth spurt in the last 15 years. The Methodist Church of Cuba, I said. Okay. From 3,000 members in the year 2000 to more than 47,000 members in 2015. Okay? So, from 3,000 members to more than 47,000 members. I'm sorry, 2025. I read that wrong. That growth followed a period in which the Cuban church had been so bound that they had ordained only one new pastor in 20 years. Okay, so we have very few leadership coming up the pike, but we have more people than ever that are a part of the church, okay? So we went to find out what happened there so we could learn from them. Everywhere we went that week, we saw churches packed with people, old people, young people, mostly poor people. It makes me think of our opening hymn, right? For everyone born a place at the table. We went to church services in places that looked like a traditional church building, but also had a lot of services and prayer meetings that shared meals in spaces that were just open courtyards tacked onto houses. Sometimes just a small living room with chairs everywhere, spilling out into the kitchen and dining room. 1 or 2 that looked more like shacks, dirt floors, no electricity. But every church we went to seemed absolutely filled with enthusiastic faith excitement, a sense that God was doing something big and important here. Everywhere we went, we asked the pastors and even the Cuban bishop, how do you explain this growth, the church's success? And again, that's not why we're here, right? Is to fill the pews. But we are here to serve people, and people must be being served if they're coming to the church. So why? So how do you explain this growth? I can see why they would ask that then. And every time we asked, the answer was the same: prayer and fasting. Prayer and fasting. I didn't quite understand, but I accept the possibility that God's power might come more potentially through these spiritual practices that we don't often depend on at home. On the last Sunday of our trip, we worshiped at the largest Methodist church in Havana. They had headphones for us, so we could listen in English to the service that was entirely in Spanish. The church was packed again that morning. One of the associate pastors started the service with announcements. At first, I didn't listen very closely, announcements. But gradually, it dawned on me that the announcements were turning into a major part of the service. They went on for 25 minutes. So I began to pay a little bit more attention to what was being said. And I realized that again and again, they were announcing services of prayer and fasting. Monday morning, Tuesday morning, Wednesday morning, every day of the week, there was a prayer service, followed by a meal, breaking the fast together. At the end of the service, sort of late morning, what was all that about? Why so much prayer and fasting? And then I got it. Listen to this. When the Cuban Revolution happened in 1959, one of the first acts of the Castro government was to shut down churches. All the churches. Priests and pastors were jailed, some for as long as 5 years. After the new socialist government had stabilized, they began to let churches open again, but only for worship services. All the social services that churches had been delivering before, feeding people, running schools, were shut down permanently. Under the Castro regime, churches were allowed to operate only out of their existing buildings and only for worship. No new churches could be built, no public gatherings, no church-related schools, no distribution of food or clothing or money. Only the government could take care of the people. And they did that by giving every person in the country $22 a month. $22 a month. No matter who you are, that was it. I don't know how far $22 went in 1959, but now it's not much. It wasn't enough to feed a family for a month. People were hungry. They skipped meals, often breakfast, to make their food go farther. And so, every morning, the church invited people to come and pray. Come and bring your hunger, the church was saying to them. And when we are finished praying, we will break our fast together. The people's involuntary fast. The fast that had been imposed on them by their poverty. Not only did the church figure out a way to serve a meal that should have been against the law, it helped people turn their hunger into something spiritual, an act of fasting and prayer. Holding these services every day was a subversive act against a government that was not serving its people well. The church saw that people were hungry, and it met that need not just by giving them food, but by turning their hunger into an experience with purpose and meaning. It's brilliant. Of course, the people came. The church saw a problem, looked at what it had to offer, and used what was in its hands to create a solution. That's what we're called to do, right? And she concludes, during the offering that day, a family carried into the sanctuary a pig they just slaughtered, hanging from a rod, feet up. This was their offering for that day, a pig big enough to feed 100 people, I bet. Jesus said to his disciples, "You give them something to eat." You don't understand, I imagine the disciples said back to him, she concludes, or at least thought it in their minds. This is a major food shortage. This is how big it is. All 12 of us would have to work for 8 months to earn enough money to buy bread for all these people. How much do you have, Jesus says? Take a look. We talked about creativity last week. Creativity. How can we use our creative minds, the spirits of the creativity that Jesus has given us through the Spirit, to change our world, to show up for the world and provide something to the world that is desperately needed? I think we all would agree on the one thing, love. Absolutely. That's what Jesus stood for over and over again, love. But how? How do we put that into practice? And again, the one of the points of this whole series has been that we each individually can do it in very small ways, showing love, showing mercy, showing kindness, as we read in Micah, doing all those things, showing and acknowledging injustices. But we also can then do it together as a group. So I pray again that each and every one of us can look at our spirits, look at our souls, look at our lives, look at the way that we live our lives. There were so many things at this church. It was a Disciples of Christ church down in Columbus. But I got so many different ideas, even just from going to a different church. And they had cups, but they were all the compostable cups. And just all the different things. Every single place you go, there was a sign, please turn off the light when you exit, right? All just these small little things, but yet they all add up. And we've been doing some of those small things, right, in different ways. But I pray again that God will just continue to be with us, to enliven our spirits and our souls. That where is it that we see need, and how can we do something about it?